Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and today we are going to take a look at the Stax SR-X9000 electrostatic headphone. Comes in at $6,200 US. It is open back. This was a kind loan from a friend of the channel, so I will not be keeping this. It will be shipped out soon, but Stax has no knowledge that I have this or that this review is going to happen until they see it publicly, so they have made no attempt to influence my opinion on this in any way. So we will go ahead and do shameless self-promotion, and then we'll come back on the other side and we will talk about the Stax SR-X9000 electrostatic headphone. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, and if you haven't, please subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon set up so that you can help support me on a monthly basis, and I've set up a PayPal donation so that you can help me out in that way too if a monthly subscription does not make sense for you. Links for all of that, including the benefits, in the description below. Please check those out. All right, on with the show. The SR-X9000, again, $6,200 US from several retailers. I can link to a couple of them below. They will not be affiliate links this time around because I am not yet an affiliate link member with any of the retailers that I will put links to. All right, but this is like Stax's newest flagship model, I believe, in their line here, and so it's kind of a growth and evolution out of like the SR-009 series. Like, it kind of has a lot of the design concepts that went into the 009, the 009S, and all of that sort of thing. So I was pretty excited to get the opportunity to review this. I have reviewed a lot of high-end headphones, both electrostat and like planar magnetic or dynamic, recently, and in the life of this channel. And so I will put links to several of those down below. So I was curious to see how this one stacks up, okay, to in the headphone field there, in the headphone market. So let's get into that. So electrostatic, right? I have discussed before what electrostatic means and like how they work. So I will link to that video down below rather than repeat all of that here. Okay, but just real quick, it uses all electric field to move a very thin membrane here. The driver being a very light, very thin membrane. They put a constant electric charge on it. They put it between two either perforated or like some kind of patterned, what they call stators, which are just plates. And then they will vary the voltage on those plates to move the that constant charged membrane in between them back and forth to create the sound. So the driver motion in here, that membrane motion, is very similar to like the planar magnetic, even though Estats came first before planar magnetic drivers. Okay, I imagine most people these days have heard planar magnetics before they have heard Estats, because Estats usually require a special kind of amplifier. Okay, but the presentation is more like a planar magnetic, right, in that way, generally speaking. So about this particular piece then, let's go ahead and get into the build and the features and the comfort and all of that. So as I hold this here, it is a very light unit. Like, there's just not a lot of heft to it. It's still well built. It's like all like metal and spring steel up here and like aluminum and all of that, like nice materials everywhere. It has this like not quite matte, but like, you know, lightly reflective and textured like gray finish here. It's fairly nice looking. There's like some, I hope this shows up, sort of like a gold-ish color on the stators in there that you can see, right? So, I mean, they are open back and all of that. Okay, we do have more round-shaped cups on this model, so they're not oval or like the egg shape that you see from Hi-Fi and all that. We are just more round in shape here. Right, all of that. So, and then head size adjustment on the inside of the headband here is right there. Okay, this clicking motion in there, several steps there. I do wish that this was a little bit more solid. It's not poor here in the head size adjustment, but I mean, for a $6,000 unit, it does feel like that could be a little bit more solid. I would also notice that this would slide on me a little bit. Over time, it would just tend to work its way up So I wish those stayed in place just a little bit better there on the build. Okay. Other than that, like there are two standout features to the build beyond that I want to talk about here. And one of them is, hey, it's an Estat with detachable cables. Right after I have gotten done recently saying that it makes sense for Estats to have attached cables just because they tend to carry a very large bias voltage. This one carries a 580 volt bias voltage on it. That can make them fairly dangerous if you have small pins you connect into a detachable cable. You can, bend those up easily, short something out, give yourself a healthy shock or an unhealthy shock, as it were. But Stax came along, right after I said that, said, oh, you can do detachable cables on an Estat, but look how they have done it. And you see those connectors in there? I hope they show up all right. I'll try to hold this still so that the camera focuses. But you have three rather thick-looking pins in there, fairly well spaced out. Okay? And then on the cable, you get a connector that looks like this. Okay, coming in there. So you notice that we have very thick pins that would be hard to bend. They are spaced fairly far apart, right? And like there's just, this would be really hard to do damage into arc across and that sort of thing. All that. So that's how they did it, okay? So really quickly on the cable, here's the stock cable. It's this flat ribbon style with the 5-pin barrel connector here on the amp end. Stax sends 2 cable lengths in it. This is the 1.5 meter cable. Then there's another one that comes in the package that is identical to this one, only it's a meter longer at 2.5 meters in length. Okay, I mostly use the short one just because on a desktop system that worked well there. Okay, the other build design that stands out here. So here's the right cup. Here is the left cup. Is the grill material here over the back. I hope this shows up well, okay? So we have this, come on, let's see it here. We have this plate right here that is held away from the back of the cup by some different peg lengths here. And these peg lengths are a little bit longer in the front of the headphone than they are in the back, so that this circular grill plate thing here is not parallel to the driver inside of the housing here. Now, why might they do that? Okay, well, when you talk about reflections of waves and sound, it travels in waves, okay? So reflections of sound waves, you tend to not want reflections to come right back on themselves. So if a wave comes in and hits a wall, for example, you don't want it to bounce straight back on itself because that will create some weird phasing cancellations and that sort of thing, or both constructive and destructive wave interference. If you can get that wave to reflect off at an angle, okay, then you have a much better shot, like diffusing the sound wave rather than reflecting it. You have a much better shot at minimizing or reducing the amount of wave interference going on. Now, this is an open back headphone, so most of the sound waves are going to pass through the grill material and just out, okay? However, there still is some material here over the back of it to create, a grill pattern here to protect the driver and the inner workings and all of that. So some proportion of the sound waves are still going to reflect back into the membrane and back towards the ear. So what Stax did here is by making this surface right here non-parallel to the driver in there, is they are reflecting those sound waves back so that they don't interfere with the incoming waves like they normally do when they just bounce right back, because they're doing more of a diffusion kind of thing than just a reflection back on itself to help control some of those cancellations and other the interference that can negatively impact the sound. Okay, now other than that, again, very light. It is comfortable on the head. The clamp force is not particularly strong, so Like, yep, there it goes. Like, if you look down or move your head around much, they do slide around on the head some. I would have liked it to clamp just a little bit harder so it stayed in place just a little bit more. Because, yeah, you basically get no head movement really without them sliding around on there. So, but otherwise, as far as comfort goes, their physical comfort is fine. The ear opening is generally big enough to hold most ears, I think, without a whole lot of pressure on them. I did not notice any hot spotting from the headband or anything. They're quite comfortable. I just wish it clamped just a little bit harder so they didn't slide around the head with movement so much. All right. So with all of that out of the way, let's talk about sound. And we'll start by talking about the test gear. Now, my test gear for Estats is somewhat limited because I am not in a position where I own any Estat gear, so I don't have any Estats here permanently. I still have the Fiden Shangri-La Jr system, right? And so I used the Energizer for that, the Shangri-La Jr Energizer. I don't know how much longer that system will be here. I don't know if Fiden will ask for that back. They did ask for the Shang Senior back to take to, what's it called? Can Jam, New York, several weeks ago now. All right, so some of you may have heard that one that I reviewed here, but the Shang Jr system is still here. So I had that Energizer and that headset to compare with. And that's it as far as Energizers go. For DACs, the two DACs that I use mostly would be my trusty Berkeley Alpha Series 2 that I've had around forever. And then I also have a Denafrips Pontus 2 on loan from a friend and in for review. So those would be the two DACs that got the most time feeding the Shang Jr. Energizer and then driving this. So some caveats on my sound comments need to happen here in that I had very limited signal chains to use with this headphone. So bear in mind that a lot of my thoughts are going to be inherently tied, particularly to the performance of the Fiden Shangri-La Jr. Energizer, which isn't terrible, but I'm sure it's also not maximizing what the SR-X9000 is capable of. So keep those caveats in mind as I make these sound descriptions here. Now, on to the meat of the sound then. The sonic attribute that just kept coming out on this one over and over and over again was just, it is astoundingly resolving. Like, what it pulls out of the music signal is just amazing. To me, that was its most standout positive trait. So it's all there. Room reverbs are resolved well. Okay, the zizzy sound of bows being dragged across strings is here. The subtleties of a drumstick hitting a metal cymbal. You hear that initial attack, and then you hear the tone and then the decay of the cymbals. That's all in there. I mean, it's just, you get so much detail retrieval and so much resolution. Now, the resolution can be a bit forward at times, to the point where for me it got a little bit fatiguing after some long listens, just because it was just so much information all the time. But if you are a resolution lover, okay, put this one on your list to check out, because it is possible that this is the second most resolving headphone I've ever had on my head. The first would be that Shangri-La Senior. It is quite possible that this one is more resolving than Susvara. I don't know for sure. Because again, limited signal chains and like not being able to hear these scale up and all of that. But it would not surprise me at all if that ended up being the case. All right. Now, as far as frequency response and all of that goes, it is a bit of a neutral bright kind of tonality to it. It has, it never really goes sharp or sibilant in the treble unless that is in the recording, but there's a fair amount of brightness to it, and then there is a little bit of above neutral energy in the upper mids, lower treble, I think. Normally when that happens to me, I get a lot of shout and honk in the timbre and the tonality, particularly with vocals. And brass instruments and all that can become overpowering and very blary and all of that, and glaring in that range. However, this was not too forward in that area where a lot of that happened. However, there was just a slight bit of hollowness to my ear with vocals, like vocal timbre, and brass instruments could get a little bit fatiguing after a while, not really sounding glary, but just the combination of that slight mid-forwardness and then just the relentless resolution can be a bit too much for me at times with this one. Okay, and so forth there. Now, bass extension is good, bass detail is good, bass texturing is fantastic. Okay, the low bass rumble on like Why So Serious from the Dark Knight soundtrack got lots of extension, all kinds of detail, and like hearing the subtleties of the bass in that track in there, that came through really well here. There's not a whole lot of like presence or rumble though, so there is good extension, but it's not just going to sit there and just rumble and feel like a subwoofer on your head if that's what you're looking for. Because again, we're talking about mostly kind of a neutral, bright-ish kind of presentation here. All right, the spatial aspects of the sound, it is not a huge sound stager, but nor is it what I would think of as intimate. It's just kind of, the sound stage is generally mostly what it needs to be most of the time. Okay, but it is amazingly holographic. Like, it does an excellent job in both the lateral and in the depth dimensions of placing sounds where they should be and then putting a distinct sense of space between adjacent sounds and all of that. So it is fantastically holographic in its spatial presentation. Okay, in there, even though it is not the biggest of sound stagers. So, I mean, overall, sonic package on its own, I do overall like it. I was impressed by its detail retrieval. It presents, you know, so much of what's in the music, and it very likely could be the case that it is the second most resolving headphone behind the Shangri-La Sr. that, you know, I have personally ever heard. Okay, so that says a lot about its resolution capability there. I do think the tonality and the timbre could stand to be just a little bit more full in the sub bass, but there's a lot of people who are going to like the timbre and the tonality and all of that to the sound here. Okay, and then yeah, that spatial presentation, not super big, but highly accurate and engaging in there. Now, as far as dynamics go, you do get a lot of snap on snare drums and a lot of speed and quickness, you know, that Estat speed and quickness through the mids and in the treble. There's not a whole lot of bass punch or slam here. So if you like not just low bass rumble, but hard hitting bass, this isn't going to be the one for you. Again, the bass that is there is super detailed and clear and has good extension. It's just not particularly powerful in either rumble or in its physicality. Okay, let's do some quick comparisons then with some other things. Let's start with the other Estat that I have on hand. That would be the Hi-Fiman Shangri-La Jr. So I think the Shang Jr. here is a little bit warmer in its tonality and in its timbre than this one is. It has a little bit more sub bass rumble than the X9000 does, but it's not as detailed. Like, it does not have the resolution from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz that this one brings out. So it's not as subtly textured in the low end. It is not quite as holographic in its spatial presentation either as this one, right? But they are fairly similar in their soundstage size and all of that. Now, I do think that the Shang Jr. stays on my head a little bit better when you talk about physical comfort than the X9000 does, because it clamps just a tiny bit harder. Not a lot, but just a little bit. That keeps it on my head a little bit more. But, again, it's not as resolving as the X9000 is. There's so much resolution here. This one doesn't quite measure up to that. All right, now, I also will bring out my Susvara here to do a comparison with this here, because, I mean, it's a $6,000 planar magnetic headphone. And then in here, I will remind you that, yes, it's planar magnetic, so it works with more traditional headphone amplifiers or speaker amps, okay, than does the X9000, which, you know, requires an electrostatic energizer. So we're not just directly comparing headphones here because we're also talking about signal chains with that. So that's just something you need to keep in mind in this comparison. But generally, since I've heard the Susvara on a number of signal chains now, it tends to have just that that nice, pleasant, like neutral, very slight, shallow V kind of sound to it that Hi-Fiman has. So it has more warmth and just more fullness to its sound than the X9000 does. I think their soundstage size is similar. They are both incredibly holographic in their imaging and in their separation. They both do depth very well in their staging as well. Okay, the sus to me though, like it still has the more natural and realistic timbre and tonality to it because of that little bit of extra warmth. It also has more sub-bass rumble and it hits harder. It has more slam and punch in the low end than this one does. They have, I would say, similar-ish speed and all of that, but you definitely hear like the difference between the electrostatic presentation and the planar presentation in here in the decay, because the decay on the X9000 is very quick. So you just get that Estat speedy sound that can come across as a little bit dry at times, whereas the Susvara still is very quick and speedy, and quick on the decay and all of that, but it also just is a little bit more natural to my ear in the trailing ends of tones and that sort of thing. So this to me still sounds more lifelike overall than the X9000 does, right? So when I was comparing these back and forth, like I would listen to this, I would enjoy it, and then I would put this on and it just kind of felt like coming home, honestly. It's like, yeah, there it is. There's that, a little bit more warmth, but then there's that more natural timbre and tonality and, that sort of thing. Now, which one of these two is ultimately more resolving? I don't know if I can answer that question right now, honestly, because I have a sense that they will both just keep scaling up and up and up with increasing quality of source gear. But the fact that I cannot readily tell you which one is more resolving ultimately, it says a lot about how much resolution this one has, because the Susvara is very transparent and pulls out so much from the music, even at low levels, which this one matches it in that. Its low-level detail retrieval is just stunning. So you don't have to get very loud to hear all the good stuff, okay, in other words. Okay, but their detail presentations are different. This one is a little bit more detail forward. It's like, hey, you like detail? Here it is. Whereas the Susvara, to me, the resolution and the detail presentation comes across as being in service to sounding organic and natural, where this one just sounds a little bit dry and artificial to me in comparison. All right. So where does that leave us with the X9000 here? So it is very, very good. Like, its resolution is stunning. Its spatial presentation, while not enormous, has a reasonable size to it. But its spatial presentation is very holographic and all that. Its timbre and tonality, doesn't sound quite right to me, but I think there are a lot of people who are going to like that presentation. Okay, that is just a little bit neutral bright with a little bit of upper mid, lower treble kind of emphasis in there. That got a little bit fatiguing to me, but it did avoid tripping my shoutiness and honkiness sensitivity most of the time. Okay, so yeah, excellent. It is definitely worthy of being in that, now top of the line tier up there at, $6,000-ish. The detachable cables are nice and all of that. So yeah, I mean, this is a really solid effort from Stax. I think there are going to be a lot of Estat fans out there that really like this one and are really happy with its sound. Just to me, it just lacks a little bit of realism because the timbre and the tonality, and then it's just a little bit too quick on the decays, I think, for it to sound like natural and organic to me. So that's where I will leave it here with the SR-X9000. Okay, good job, Stax. It's pretty impressive. All right, I'm Wave Theory. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe and to leave a comment down below. Please check out my PayPal where you can make a one-time donation to help support the channel, or my Patreon where you can support me on a monthly basis and get into a Discord where you can talk to me and some of my audio friends and potentially get early access to some of my videos depending on which tier you select. So, as always, thanks for watching and enjoy the music.